Hello everyone, welcome back. I am Fer, and let me tell you the takeaway of this video right now. We should take everything we learn about AI safety and apply it to our governments right now, because if we don't, we might end up living in dystopias until the end of time. And I know, maybe that conclusion doesn't make a lot of sense right now, but it will by the end of this video. Also, this video deals with a lot of very big and abstract ideas, and I'm not sure I'm going to be able to illustrate most of them. So this is going to be more like a podcast than a video. So anyway, we have a lot of ideas to get through, so let us begin. It all begins with Fermi's paradox. You have probably heard about this already. It is the idea that if the universe is so unimaginably big, surely life should have evolved in other planets by now, and some of that should have generated intelligent life, which should be colonizing the cosmos. And we should see some evidence of that, but we don't. When we look at the stars, it's empty. It looks as if we are the only intelligent species in the universe. And the question is, how is that possible? How can a universe so big be so empty of intelligent life? And we don't know, nobody knows the answer, and there are many proposed solutions. Maybe we are one of the first civilizations ever in the history of the universe. Or maybe life is way more rare than we ever thought. Or maybe we are part of some cosmic experiment or a cosmic zoo, and that's why they keep us isolated, or something like that. There are many other solutions, and obviously no one knows which one is right. But I have my own solution that I have not seen anyone else propose. So here it goes. I think that the reason the universe looks so empty is because all alien civilizations are trapped in dystopias. And dystopias are never interested in colonizing space, so they stay in their own planets forever. And okay, I know that doesn't sound very plausible right now, but it will make a lot of sense, I promise you. So to understand why all intelligent life in the universe is trapped in dystopias, first, let's think about artificial intelligences. I swear it's gonna make sense. So when we create artificial intelligences, we are making a computer program, and a computer program that is able to learn, right? And we want it to learn to do some task. Say, for example, we want to create a computer program that can play Tetris, right? We cannot program into this machine what it means to play Tetris well. It's a very abstract concept, like it cannot be translated into pure mathematics, into pure computer code. So what we do instead is tell this artificial intelligence a way to know if it's doing right or wrong. So we tell this artificial intelligence, hey, look at your score in this game. If your score is higher, that means that you are playing well. If your score is low, that means that you are not playing well. In this sense, the artificial intelligence is able to figure out what actions it has to perform in order to increase that score. And it just so happens that playing Tetris correctly increases that score. So this is what we called a reward function, right? So all artificial intelligences have a reward function, and all they are trying to do is just satisfy that reward function. Think about that. This artificial intelligence is not trying to learn to play Tetris. It doesn't. It's just trying to learn how to increase its reward function, which just so happens to be aligned with our goal of making an artificial intelligence that plays Tetris. So you see, our goals are aligned. The goal of the artificial intelligence of satisfying its reward function is aligned with our goal of creating this machine. But those goals can become misaligned. Because what if these computer programs find some kind of glitch that increases its score? Then this computer program would just exploit that glitch over and over just to increase the score, and it wouldn't be playing the game. And so You see, then our goals became misaligned. And this is one of the biggest problems with AI safety, because the risk is that every time we create an artificial intelligence, we might give it some reward function to achieve something, but that artificial intelligence is going to find ways to cheat the reward function that we give to it, and it's going to start doing things we don't want it to do. And so the question in AI in AI safety research is, how do we avoid that, right? So that's a very important problem. And actually, there was this very famous case of an artificial intelligence that was programmed to play Tetris, and at some point it was about to lose the game, so it just paused it. It just paused the game forever. Sure, the reward function is not going to go any higher, but it's not going to go any lower. And in that way, the computer says, oh, I won. I solved the game. But of course, we say, no, you are not doing what we want. And so just keep in mind that for this artificial intelligence, pausing the game is the same as winning, because that's how we programmed it. Okay, so now let's think about governments. The thing is that governments, in a sense, can be viewed as artificial intelligences. And I know that sounds crazy, because governments are institutions made of people, while artificial intelligences are just computer programs. But consider this famous experiment known as the Chinese room. Imagine that there's a person in a room, and this person doesn't speak Chinese, but they have a book with instructions about how to reply to messages in Chinese. And then this person is like sitting in this room, and someone puts in this room a letter written in Chinese. This person doesn't know what it says, but he just goes through the book, follows the instructions, and writes a message back. And then they push that message out of the room. And then a person outside who is able to speak Chinese picks it up, reads it, and writes a reply. And then it slides the reply under the door. This person sees it, replies again, and over and over and over. And so this person who can speak Chinese is having a conversation, but with whom? Because the guy inside the room doesn't speak Chinese, and the book is not alive. But in a way, the system of the person and the book combined form a sort of intelligent system that can reply to messages in Chinese and can have a conversation with a Chinese speaker. You can even imagine that this person who speaks Chinese falls in love with whomever it is talking to, but that person doesn't exist, or at least it's not a person, it's not a human. And you can take this to the extreme. Imagine that instead of having one person with one book of instructions, I have like 1 million people, and I just give a message to one of them, which is just ones and zeros, and they just follow the instructions in their book, and they pass the message to another person. That person follows instructions, and so on and so on. And this message goes through those 1 million people. By the end, these million people with their million instruction books could perform a computer algorithm, and a highly complex one. And so, is that a computer? It is doing everything a computer should be doing. In fact, that's by like the definition of a Turing machine. And so, we can see that you can have computers, you can have computer programs performed by people, right? And so, it is not that crazy to think that some institutions that we create can be viewed as machines as well. And so governments have their own rules, they have their own instructions, and they have humans performing those instructions. Granted, this program is not very strict. Humans can do a lot of things that they are not supposed to do. They can change the rules, they can break the rules. And yet, I think that only means that this is a very primitive artificial intelligence. But it is an artificial intelligence nonetheless. Which begs the question, okay, so if you're going to see governments as primitive artificial intelligences, what is their reward function? Do they even have one? Okay, and then we start to think about how governments change. What is the goal of a government from its own perspective? Okay, so let's think about humans being nomads like, I don't know, 200,000 years ago, right? And so you have all of these humans, And at some point they decide to work together in large groups, right? Because obviously working together you can achieve more things that you could alone, right? That's simple logic. And they have some goals in mind, like they want to be protected from rival groups, they want to have more food to increase their harvest, stuff like that. In general, humans want to improve their quality of life, and that's why they decide to work together, okay? And so at first, they maybe could try to work with consensus, always asking every individual what they think should be done in every situation, and they don't do anything unless everyone agrees, right? That could work, but as the group grows, or if you want to grow the group, you need to find some other way to take decisions, because at some point it just becomes impractical to get the consensus of every individual. So they are motivated to create a system for collective decision making, and that system will be a government. And it's a very rational thing to do if you want to use your efforts more efficiently to improve more your quality of life. A system that allows you to reach decisions much quicker and more effectively. Like obviously you want that. Obviously it would help you in your goal. But now let's say that this government is not working very well. Maybe they were attacked by a rival group and this government they created couldn't organize them to protect them or something like that. Well, then they might decide to change this government. And that's the thing. People are motivated to change their governments when those governments don't work. And that was 200,000 years ago when people started forming tribes, and it is true today. Whenever our governments do things that we don't like, we are motivated to change them. Either by pacific means, like for example in the case of democracy, or by violent means in case of revolutions and civil wars. And so the thing is that a government, in order to continue existing, it must satisfy people. That's where we can start to see the reward function of the government. The reward function of a government is whether or not people want to change it. And in fact, this is very similar to something that Chinese historians called the mandate of heaven. The idea was that if a government wasn't being good to its people, then it would lose the favor of the gods and it would be changed. This is a very similar idea. If a government doesn't keep its people happy, those people will be motivated to change it. And so the government wants to do everything it can to prevent people to change that government. Now that might be improving the quality of life of those people, which is the reason it was created. That's the game it was created to play. But there are other strategies that satisfy that same goal. For example, let's say that this government, if you think of a government as an entity, as an artificial intelligence, then this artificial intelligence could try to give some benefits to a few individuals in exchange for those individuals coercing all the other individuals in the population into keep accepting this government. And that's when you get authoritarian regimes. And it makes a lot of sense from the perspective of the government. It is fulfilling its reward function. It is preventing people from changing it. And there are many other strategies as well. For example, creating an ideology is an excellent strategy. If a government cannot supply to its people a good quality of life, it can convince them that it is supplying something else. It doesn't even have to be something real. It can be something as some perceived freedom, or as nationalism, or it can be just perceived as a sense of purpose for a greater thing. All of those things are not strictly real. They only exist in the mind of the people. But they can convince people to keep defending this government, to not rebel against this government. And so all of those goals make perfect sense from the perspective of the government. Remember, all it's trying to do is to convince people not to change it. Because, like, in a sense, we built governments to sort of think that if we didn't change them, they were doing something right, because we only changed them when they were doing something wrong. And so governments can sometimes improve the quality of life of their citizens, but other times that they can grow like very restrictive and oppressive, or they can develop more and more radical ideologies and convince people to defend those ideologies, even to their own detriment. And when we take this to the extreme, we get dystopias. A dystopia is basically this government artificial intelligence hacking the reward function of its people. Take, for example, North Korea. In North Korea, people are miserable. They are objectively miserable. They are hungry, they are sick, they live very short lives, they do not have the freedom to look for what they want to do with their lives. It's horrible. But they are told their entire lives that they are the happiest they could possibly be. They are told they are free. They are told they are serving a great nation. And so they have the ideology. And if the ideology doesn't stick with any of them, there is an incredibly oppressive system that will stomp anyone who dares question the system. And so you see that from the perspective of that artificial intelligence, it won the game. But from our perspective, it is the same as an artificial intelligence using glitches in a video game to keep it increasing its score without playing the game, because it's not increasing the quality of life for the people. And in fact, a dystopia sort of pauses the progress of society because it doesn't allow anything to change, or at least it wants nothing to change. Because, okay, think about it. If a dystopia arises, it arises with the world in a certain state, something that allows this government to have that much power. But then the conditions might change, and if those conditions change, maybe this government is not able to exert that amount of control, and then that dystopia could crumble. And finally, some rebellion could arise and change it. So the dystopia wants the state of the world to stay exactly the same. Because if the state of the world doesn't change, and in this world it is able to exert that amount of control, then it's going to be able to continue exerting that oppressive control. So you understand, dystopias don't want the state of the world to change. And okay, you might think that, well, even if the world changes a little, this dystopia should be confident that it can still control people. And yeah, maybe, but why run the risk, right? Like, there is no point. Just stay the way you are and the risk is zero. Because as soon as you start introducing unknown variables, even if you're confident you could be able to account for them and still continue being a dystopia, maybe you don't, maybe you are wrong. And so the risk is way too high. The safest strategy is to keep everything the same. And okay, all of this is about human governments, right? These are just features of human governments, and you might think there's no reason to suspect the same could happen to aliens, right? But it can, and let me explain. So we're going to make some extremely basic assumptions. For example, I'm going to assume that whenever life arises somewhere in the universe, it is made of individual units. I'm assuming that there are no hive minds and there are no planet-sized organisms like the planet in Solaris. Excellent book, by the way. Go read it by Stanislav Lem. Anyway, so there are no hive minds and there are no planet-sized organisms. Whenever there is life, it is made by individuals. Seems like a reasonable assumption. Okay, so now if intelligent life arises, it will be composed by intelligent individual beings, which I'm just gonna call individuals from now on. Okay, so you have that all intelligent species in the universe are made by individuals. Maybe those individuals never choose to work together. I mean, it is possible. I mean, humans spent hundreds of thousands of years living in very small nomadic groups, and for hundreds of thousands of years we didn't form very large groups. So yeah, maybe aliens don't either, and maybe there are entire civilizations of intelligent hermits out there. Those civilizations are never going to develop very complex technology anyway, so we can just, they are just aside. We don't care about those cases for now. let's now consider those civilizations of individuals that do decide to work together to increase their quality of life. Well, at some point they are going to also need a system for collective decision making, right? Because they are going to run into the same problems, that the nature of communication, the nature of information itself, doesn't allow them to reach a consensus every time on every problem, right? They are going to need to create this system that can take decisions without consulting every single individual in the group. And so, given those assumptions, aliens would be individuals that form governments. Okay, those governments would be extremely different from ours, unimaginably different for sure. But the question is, do they change those governments when they don't work? It seems like such a reasonable thing to do. What else would you do? Change them when they work? Don't change them when they don't work? But if they do this extremely simple thing, change their governments when they don't work, they are just establishing the reward function of that government to be, okay, just convince these individuals not to change you, right? And so that as soon as you establish that reward function, you establish the possibility for a goal misalignment. Because yeah, now, sure, maybe these governments are extremely different, and maybe these governments are way more likely to improve the quality of life of the individuals that made them. But as long as it is possible for their goals to be misaligned, those artificial intelligences will find those strategies sooner or later. And maybe those strategies are very different from the strategies I described here, which are oppression and extreme ideologies. Maybe there are some other strategies that work for those other intelligent species. But the point is that those artificial intelligences will look for strategies that convince those individuals not to change the government regardless of their quality of life, and those strategies will also try to freeze the state of the world so that nothing changes, so that the game is paused, and so that they never lose this control that they have gained, so that the reward function is always positive. And here's the question. Okay, so maybe you agree that dystopias are possible in every civilization made of individuals. But that doesn't mean that dystopias should arise. I mean, in our world, we only have like 1 or 2 dystopias, Korea, Eritrea, and maybe some others, depending on your definition of dystopias. But the vast majority of the world, even if those governments aren't great, they certainly aren't dystopic. So the question becomes, what happens first? Does a civilization is able to start colonizing space before it is united under a dystopia? Or is it more likely for a civilization to be united under a dystopia than colonizing space? Okay, let me rephrase it. So basically we have 2 events: colonizing space and like a world government becoming a dystopia. Which one is more likely? If it is more likely for like a world government to become a dystopia, then those dystopias will never explore space. Because think about it. A dystopia wants to freeze the state of the world. If you start exploring space, that immediately adds a ton of unknown variables, things this dystopia can never control. It is just way safer to just stay in your own planet where you know all the variables, or at least you have enough control over the variables you know. And so, if it is more likely for these unified world governments to become dystopias, then intelligent species are never going to colonize the cosmos, or at least it's going to be extremely unlikely. And then we would see what we see already. We would see an empty universe where there are no signs of intelligent life, because they never developed to the point to create signs we would be able to observe from here, because they are all trapped in their planets under these oppressive and ideologically extremist governments. And it sounds crazy, I know, but the evidence is the empty sky. Okay, I'm not saying that that's for sure the solution to the Fermi paradox. I'm just saying that it makes a lot of sense given what we know about intelligent beings and governments and artificial intelligences, and the fact that the universe seems to be empty. So now the question is, what does this mean for us? Because I hope you will agree that this idea is terrifying, right? The idea that all life in the universe is trapped in dystopias. We don't want to do that. And okay, so that's why I said at the beginning of the video that we should take everything we learn about AI safety and apply it to our governments. Whatever we learn, whatever tricks we learn to prevent goal misalignment them, we should use them.
And, oh, by the way, I think I should mention this. Many people might think that democracies avoid this problem, but no, democracies don't avoid the problem of goal misalignment. They just make it more complex. Because, yeah, a democracy bakes change into the system, but then political parties arise. And those political parties will start developing their own strategies to remain in power. And as long as the same party remains in power, well, it's like if the government wasn't changing, right? And so you have the same problem from before. Those are the bad news. It is likely that all intelligent life in the universe is living under dystopias that are hell on earth. But here are the good news. Once a civilization starts colonizing space, it becomes immune to this problem. And to understand why, let's try to think about why humanity didn't fall to dystopias long ago. Let's think, for example, 2000 years ago. You have the Romans, the Persians, and the Chinese. These are some extremely well-organized, powerful nations. But they couldn't control everything. They were nomadic hordes, there were plagues, there were other nations they didn't even know about that caused domino effects of migrations. And remember that dystopias are extremely dependent on the state of the world. And back then, 2000 years ago, all of these powerful nations didn't even know of all the variables they were subjected to, much less control them. For this reason, even if a dystopia had arisen in the past of Earth, all of these unknown variables would have changed the state of the world, and so that dystopia would have collapsed, or most likely it didn't even have a chance to arise in the first place. It is only when nations have a very good knowledge of the variables around them and the ability to control them that dystopias can arise in the first place, and that's how you get North Korea. But even North Korea is in a world full of variables it cannot control, because there are many other governments doing their own thing, and their goals are not aligned with North Korea, or at least not entirely. And so it is likely that the state of the world will continue to change, and eventually it will change in such a way that North Korea cannot continue exerting that level of control over its people. And so, as long as the state of the world is in flux, dystopias are doomed to end eventually. That's why dystopias don't want to colonize space. Because once you colonize space, you include so many unknown variables, as we explained before, that one of those variables eventually, even if many of those variables do not introduce changes that will make that dystopia collapse, over millions of years, one of those changes has to make the trick. It's like if you have 20 dice and you roll them and you want all of them to fall in 6, you will have to roll them over and over and over. But eventually, you'll get it. Eventually, all the faces of the dice will be in 6. So that's what colonizing space is. It's just rolling the dice, and eventually, everything will fall in its place, and it will make the dystopia collapse. So, now imagine that humanity is colonizing space, and let's say that there are people living in Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Earth, Venus, all the places. And then let's say that one of those places becomes a dystopia. Let's say Mars becomes a dystopia. Extremely sad, millions of people live in hell on Earth. But all these other pockets of population are not living under a dystopia, and they act as sources of unknown variables that will make the dystopia of Mars that will lead the dystopia of Mars to end eventually, right? And it is even conceivable that humans could continue expanding, going to other systems and going to many other places. And so as humans of population, as pockets of human population increase through the galaxy, sure, many of them will become dystopias by probability, but many of them will not. And so, as long as they continue to expand, the likelihood that all of them become dystopias is extremely small. And in fact, it is more likely that humanity just becomes extinct for some other reason, that humanity just becoming, all these human civilization becoming dystopias at the same time. I mean, it is possible. I mean, what I said about the dice, it's just, you are rolling the dice all the time. But even if all human civilizations in space became dystopias, there are still many outside factors that could lead one of them to stop being a dystopia, that causes a chain of events that leads to many of them. And so once a civilization is colonizing space, there is extremely low risk that it will fall to this dystopia trap. And so, well, yeah, that's the thing. That's the video. I hope you liked it. I hope it gave you a slight cosmic horror. And so, yeah, I hope it makes you see your government on a different way. It certainly made me look my government in a different way. All governments, in fact, when you realize that when you realize that expression "cog in the machine," it's more insightful than we ever thought it was. You are literally part of a machine, a literal machine, and that machine, in a way, in a very abstract way, has a mind of its own, and we should be mindful of that. We should keep that in mind. And I don't know, hopefully, as we continue researching AI safety and we continue improving, we will continue to find strategies to prevent goal misalignment. But I think we will never get rid of that risk, so it's a continuous effort in that way, like an arms race against the faults of our own systems. So yeah. So thanks for watching, and if you ever find yourself living under a dystopia, never forget to love, because that's the message of 1984 and Brave New World, that as long as we can love, truly love, dystopias have not won. Oh, also read We. It's the first dystopian novel, extremely good. Goodbye.